The air in a wrestling arena is a living thing. It's a thick, tangible mixture of hope, anticipation, and the collective roar of thousands of souls waiting for a story to unfold. But on that night, the air held something else. The dust of memory. For 7 years, the name Serafina was a whisper, a ghost story told by veteran fans to newcomers. She was the phenom who held the championship with a grip of iron, the prodigy who painted masterpieces of combat on the canvas, the heir to a legendary dynasty who, at the very peak of her ascent, simply vanished. There was no farewell tour, no final match, no tearful speech. One day she was the sun around which the entire women's division orbited, and the next, she was a black hole. No interviews, no sightings, no social media posts. She was gone. The world moved on, new champions were crowned, and her story became a cautionary tale about burning too bright, too fast. But her fans never truly let go. They held on to the memory of her fire, the echo of her entrance music. And so, when the main event ended that night, and the victor stood celebrating, no one expected what came next. The familiar fade to black for the end of the show. Except this time, the darkness lingered. It was a heavy, expectant silence that fell over the crowd, a silence full of questions. And then, a single, haunting piano note echoed through the speakers. A note no one had heard in 7 years. For years, she was gone. No interviews, no appearances, no updates. Then suddenly, the lights went out, and she returned like a storm. Every fan in that arena knew history was being made. The single piano note bloomed into a familiar, sorrowful melody. Her melody. A single spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the top of the entrance ramp. And there, a silhouette. It was unmistakable. The posture, the aura, the sheer, undeniable presence. Time seemed to stop. Popcorn was frozen halfway to mouths. Conversations died in throats. Then, a slow, collective intake of breath from 20,000 people, followed by an explosion of sound so deafening it shook the building to its foundations. It wasn't just a cheer. It was a release. 7 years of wondering, of hoping, of telling stories about the ghost, all erupting in a single, cathartic roar. Grown men were weeping. Strangers were grabbing each other by the shoulders, their faces a perfect picture of disbelief and joy. On commentary, the professionals were reduced to screaming, stammering fans. They had no script for this, no producer in their ear telling them what to say. This was real. This was lightning in a bottle. Serafina took one step forward into the light, her face etched with an emotion no one could quite decipher. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't joy. It was something deeper, something heavier. She had returned, but the ghost she left behind had returned with her, and its shadow stretched all the way to the ring. While the arena was consumed by joyous chaos, a different kind of storm was brewing backstage. The gorilla position, the nerve center of the show, was frozen in a state of stunned paralysis. Producers and executives, men and women who prided themselves on controlling every second of the broadcast, stared at the monitors with wide, unblinking eyes. This wasn't on the schedule. Her music wasn't in the system. Her name wasn't on any call sheet. This return was a rogue wave, and it had just capsized their meticulously planned show. Further down the hall, in the locker room, the reaction was even more potent. The current champion, a fierce and dominant force named Zara, had just finished her match. She was toweling the sweat from her brow when she heard the music. She saw the reaction on the TV screen, and the championship belt in her hand suddenly felt a little lighter, a little less significant. Her entire reign, her identity, had been built in the void that Serafina had left. Now, the ghost was back to reclaim her kingdom. A silent, palpable tension filled the room. The other wrestlers, who had been laughing and unwinding, now watched the monitor with a mix of awe, fear, and professional jealousy. Serafina wasn't just another competitor. She was a living myth. She represented a standard, a bar that many had tried and failed to reach. Her return wasn't just a new challenge, it was a judgment on everyone who had come after her. The questions began to fly through the backstage corridors like ricocheting bullets. Who knew? Who approved this? The head of creative, a man known for his volcanic temper, was demanding answers, but no one had any to give. Security teams were scrambling, unsure if this was a planned spectacle or a legitimate breach. It felt like both. The sheer professionalism of the entrance, the timing, the music, the spotlight, suggested a coordinated effort. Yet the absolute shock on the faces of the most powerful people in the company told a different story. This was an act of rebellion disguised as a miracle. It was a power play of the highest order. It sent a clear, unspoken message to everyone in the back. The old rules no longer applied. While the executives panicked and the champion seethed, the veterans of the locker room, the ones who had shared a ring with Serafina 7 years ago, watched with a quiet, knowing gravity. They understood what the younger talent didn't. They knew the intensity she brought, the relentless perfectionism that drove her not just to win, but to dominate. They knew the sacrifices she had made, and they knew that whatever had been powerful enough to make her walk away from it all must have been a demon of unimaginable size. Now she was back, and they wondered, with a shared, chilling thought, did she conquer that demon, or did she bring it back with her? To understand the shock of Serafina's return, you have to understand why she left. She wasn't just a champion, she was wrestling royalty. Her father was the Titan, a man whose name was synonymous with the industry, a first ballot Hall of Famer whose legend was carved into the very foundation of the company. From the moment she stepped into a ring, Serafina wasn't just fighting an opponent. She was fighting his shadow. Every victory was compared to his. Every failure was seen as a stain on his legacy. The pressure was immense, a constant crushing weight. For a time, she carried it, with a grace that defied belief. She forged her own identity, one built on technical prowess and a silent, smoldering intensity that was entirely her own. She proved she was more than just the Titan's daughter. She was his successor. But the whispers never stopped. The expectation never faded. The world wanted her to be him, to smile like him, to raise the belt like him. And in the end, that was the war she couldn't win. The last time the world saw her, she was defending her championship in a brutal, history-making match. She won, but the look in her eyes as she held the belt aloft was hollow, vacant. A few days later, she quietly relinquished the title and disappeared, leaving behind a legacy that felt both complete and tragically unfinished. She had climbed the mountain, only to realize it wasn't her mountain at all. In the hours and days following her return, the world's media machine roared to life. Every sports show, every podcast, every wrestling blog was consumed by a single topic: Serafina. Where has she been for 7 years? Why did she come back now? The silence from her and the company only added fuel to the fire. Speculation ran wild. Some claimed she had been living a quiet life in a remote mountain town, completely disconnected from the world. Others spun elaborate tales of her training in secret dojos across Japan, honing her skills for this very moment. Old interviews were analyzed, past matches rewatched, every frame scoured for clues that might have predicted her departure, and now her return. Her image was everywhere, a ghost suddenly made flesh. The narrative was intoxicating, the return of the fallen queen. But for those who knew her, the story was more complex. Her family, particularly her legendary father, remained conspicuously silent. Friends from her past life deflected questions, and offering only vague platitudes about her privacy. This wasn't a simple comeback story. It was the reopening of a wound. The world saw a returning hero, a myth come to life. But those who looked closer saw a woman who had walked out of one fire and, for reasons unknown, had just stepped willingly into another. The entire world was asking why. and the only person with the answer was standing in the middle of the ring, silent. A week later, she was scheduled to speak. Not to wrestle, simply to address the world. The anticipation was electric. What would she say? Would she explain the 7 years of silence? Would she lay claim to the championship she never lost? The arena was sold out, a sea of fans holding signs with her name, their collective breath held in anticipation. Serafina walked to the ring, not with the explosive energy of a warrior, but with the deliberate, heavy steps of someone carrying an unseen burden. She took the microphone, her eyes scanning the thousands of faces looking back at her. The silence was absolute. She opened her mouth to speak, but before a single word could escape, a different theme song hit the speakers. It was the champion, Zara. Dripping with arrogance and draped in gold, Zara marched to the ring, a microphone already in her hand. She circled Serafina like a shark, a venomous smirk on her face. She spoke of how she had carried the division, how she had built an empire on the ashes of Serafina's abandoned kingdom. She called her a coward, a quitter who couldn't handle the pressure. The crowd booed, but Zara's words were sharp, calculated to provoke a reaction. Serafina just stood there, listening, her expression unreadable. When Zara finally finished her tirade, she shoved the microphone into Serafina's chest. "Say something, ghost," she spat. Serafina looked down at the microphone, then up at Zara. She slowly shook her head, let the mic drop to the mat with a thud, and walked away without a single word, leaving the champion and the world utterly bewildered. The silent walkout was an act of defiance more powerful than any speech. It baffled pundits and enraged the champion. It was a declaration that she would not play by their rules. She would not be goaded into a fight for a prize she no longer seemed to want. The fallout was immediate, but the most significant response came from the one person whose voice mattered most, her father. The Titan, who had maintained his own dignified silence for 7 years regarding his daughter's disappearance, released a single, carefully worded statement. It wasn't an endorsement or a condemnation. It was a plea. He spoke of the pride he had in his daughter's accomplishments, but also of the profound pain he felt watching the industry consume her. He wrote, "The ring gives you everything, but it takes a piece of your soul in return. I have watched my daughter sacrifice more than anyone will ever know for a legacy I never asked her to carry. My only hope is that she has returned not to reclaim a crown, but to reclaim herself." The statement was a bombshell. It recontextualized everything. This wasn't a story about a returning champion. This was a story about a daughter, a father, and the crushing weight of a name. The pressure on Serafina tripled overnight. Now she wasn't just fighting the current champion or her own past. She was fighting the very definition of her family's legacy, a legacy her own father was now asking her to redefine before the entire world. The match was inevitable. Serafina versus Zara, the Ghost versus the Empress. It was billed as the biggest match in the history of the division. The night of the event, the air was thick with a tension that went far beyond a championship. It was about validation. For Zara, it was a chance to finally prove she was not a placeholder champion, to defeat the myth and solidify her own era. For Serafina, no one was quite sure what it was for. As she made her entrance, her eyes were different. The hollowness was gone, replaced by a calm, focused clarity. She wasn't looking at the title or at her opponent. She was looking inward. The bell rang, and the fight began. It was a masterpiece of storytelling. Zara was a storm of aggression, fueled by years of resentment. Serafina was the calm eye of the hurricane, weathering the assault with a defensive prowess that seemed almost supernatural. She wasn't wrestling like she used to. The flashy, crowd-pleasing moves were gone. In their place was a raw, efficient, and almost painful-looking style. She was fighting not to win, but to endure, to absorb every bit of punishment Zara could deliver, as if it were a penance. With every blow she took, she seemed to grow stronger, her resolve hardening. The crowd watched, mesmerized, realizing they were witnessing not a competition, but a painful and beautiful exorcism playing out on a global stage. This was her confession. This was her absolution. In the end, she won. A single, decisive move that came not from a place of anger, but of acceptance. The referee raised her hand, and the championship was handed to her. The crowd erupted, expecting the coronation they had waited 7 years to see. But Serafina simply held the belt, her fingers tracing the polished gold plates. She stared at it, not with love or triumph, but with the detached curiosity of a historian examining an artifact. Zara had retreated, her reign over. The ring belonged to Serafina. She asked for a microphone, and this time, no one interrupted. The arena fell silent once more. "For 7 years," she began, her voice steady and clear. "I ran from this. I ran from the cheers, the expectations, and the name on the back of my robe. I thought if I ran far enough, I could outrun the echo of my father's legacy." She looked down at the title. "I didn't come back for this. This belt was a cage. My return was not about reclaiming it. It was about proving to myself that I could. And now that I know I can." She paused and did the unthinkable. She laid the championship belt gently in the center of the ring. "I am setting it free, and I am setting myself free." She walked out of the ring, up the ramp, and disappeared into the darkness, leaving the symbol of an industry's highest achievement abandoned in the spotlight. The story was never about a comeback. It was about a goodbye.